Hello, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Ask the Expert, a series in which the alumni relations team from Queen's will be speaking to experts from across the university on a range of subjects and giving you the opportunity to ask your key questions. Today, we're joined by Professor Karola Dillenburger, Director for the Centre of Behaviour Studies, and she'll be speaking to us on the subject of engaging your child to learn during lockdown. Professor Dillenburger, it's a pleasure to have you with us and a real privilege to have you kicking off the series. Could we begin by you giving us a little bit of information on the work that you do and some background of the wider work of the centre?
Yes, thank you very much, Andy, and it's a real pleasure to be part of this great initiative by the alumni group, and to be able to do the inaugural speech, the inaugural session is a great privilege. As you say, I'm Karola Dillenburger. I'm the director of the Centre for Behaviour Analysis. At the centre, it's a busy centre. We started about 10 years ago, opening the centre as a research centre. We run quite a number of courses. We have specifically the Masters in Applied Behaviour Analysis, which is a professionally accredited course, and we have the Masters in Autism Spectrum Disorders. We also run seminar series and shorter courses through the Open Learning at Queen's. We conduct a lot of research. And much of our research is related to how to help children with autism or children in general education settings, but we also conduct some research how to help adults. And as the name goes, it's all about behaviour and how we can help people achieving the aims that they have in their lives.
Thank you, Professor Dillenburger. It sounds like fascinating work, and I would say particularly relevant to the situation we find ourselves in at the moment. I'm sure this is a subject that is going to be of interest to a lot of viewers, obviously particularly parents. And I'd now like to open up the session to questions from attendees. I'd like to get the ball rolling myself, actually, with a question which is perhaps a little broader in relation to home learning and the current situation. As a father myself, I've been anxious about the long-term effects on children's mental health. They're being removed from schools and nurseries and missing out on the social interactions with their peers that go hand in hand with formal learning. Is this a valid concern for parents to have? And if so, is there anything that can be done to mitigate the negative effects?
Yeah, thank you, Andy. And congratulations for having a lovely 3.5-year-old. We are worried about our children. I've got 4 children ourselves, although they're all adults by now, but we are worried about our children. There's much talk about the worry about their mental health. But the mental health is very much linked to our parenting, especially with the very young ones. And it's really a question of us as parents setting the example so that to mitigate against any larger issues with their mental health. It is about us being calm in the situation and us coping in the situation. Children can cope with an awful lot of different and new situations. They're very, very adaptable. But it is about model learning from their point of view, from a learning point of view. What are they actually seeing at home? And if you, as a parent, are very upset and very stressed by the situation, it's more likely that the children will also pick up on that stress. If you're relaxed.
So in a sense, sort of mirroring the behaviour of the parents.
Exactly, and especially the very young ones, they learn like little sponges, don't they? Whenever you sometimes the things you want them to learn, and other times the things you don't really want them to learn, but they pick it up like a little sponge most of the time, and it really is a question of, as adults, setting the scene, making it a positive experience. There's an awful lot of very positive to come out of this. Yes, there's stresses. Yes, there are differences, and new learning is required. But there's also a lot of positives. I mean, when do you ever have so much time to spend with your children at home? Both, if you're a 2-parent family, both parents with the children at home, if you have 1-parent family, the same, you have time. And I realize that for some parents, it is very, very stressful, but especially if you have a child with disabilities or more than one child. But for the vast majority of parents, it's just relax yourself into it. This is not, this situation will change again. This is not forever the situation.
Thank you. Looks like we have our first question in, and it's as follows. As children learn at different rates, should parents be concerned that their children might fall behind? And what specifically might they be able to do about this?
Yeah, I mean, I understand the question whenever it comes falling behind in terms of school learning, because of course learning is much broader than what the information that they pick up from school learning. So the falling behind, they might fall behind in certain in maths or in history or whatever the subject might be, but we have an opportunity here to teach them not only the knowledge and the curriculum, but also to teach them about coping and about amusing themselves, being self-sufficient, setting their own tasks, taking responsibilities. You know, there's so much learning can be done in this rather unusual situation. So much new things that children can pick up. I mean, for instance, you know, helping with making dinner. You know, we at home, there's 5 of us in the house at the moment. We're all adults. We take turns. We have a very nice rota that everybody cooks dinner you know, so you cook every 5th day. We all sit around the table having dinner. Now that started not when they were 20, that started when they were much younger. So if you have the opportunity now, your 3-year-old can help with making dinner, can set the table, can you know, learn all of those kinds of other skills as well. So the academic
sort of an opportunity to instill those life skills now while there's the opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm saying. We can have an awful lot of learning happening that is a sort of a natural environment learning. You know, stuff happens in the house. They can learn to be responsible for the say the dog or the cat or whatever, and they can learn to be responsible for watering the plants. There's an awful lot of things that the children can learn. I wouldn't worry too much, to be honest, about the curriculum. That's more for the older ones. I mean, if you have children that are coming up to the exams, yes, of course they need to cover the curriculum. But I believe the teachers are sending stuff. There are virtual classrooms, and the children can stay on top of the curriculum material. But I think we need to also just remember that there's so many learning opportunities in the natural environment of the home that we can take advantage of, and as you say, the life skills that they can pick up at this stage, which is quite unusual. You know, usually it sort of goes in between somebody cooking dinner and then homework, and then, you know, the hecticness of schools and coming home.
Of course. We've had a few questions come in. The next really is sort of associated to the first question from someone who certainly looks like they have their work cut out. With a 4-year-old and an 11-year-old with very different needs, a full-time job and a couple of businesses, homeschooling isn't really happening at the rate I would like. Yeah. Should there be a concern there? From what you said in the previous question, you seem to be suggesting that parents shouldn't be overly anxious.
That's what I'm saying. It links into your first question about the mental health as well, because if parents get very anxious about the school curriculum, obviously it depends. An 11-year-old obviously has to stay on top of things a little more than a 4-year-old. But if you, as a parent, get anxious about these things, you're actually modeling some anxiety behaviors that the kids are going to pick up on. So I would be much more worried about staying relaxed, not beating yourself up. If one of the days the weather is fantastic and you really can't get them around the kitchen table or wherever they do their work, but the weather is fantastic and they can learn to, I don't know, pick flowers or do something in the garden, they can learn to play together really well. I mean, for instance, if you have this quite wide age gap between 11 and 4, there's a lot of relationship building that can happen at the moment, because they probably have quite different interests, and maybe they don't spend that much time together on the normal run of them, you know, normal times. But here they have an opportunity to maybe set the 11-year-old to teach the younger one something, a skill that the 11-year-old already has. They could set out a learning plan for the younger one on how they can teach it and make it fun. and set a plan. And that's huge learning. That's fantastic learning. That's nearly getting into parenting skills for them when they grow up. Do you know what I mean? So I think when parents get stressed, when parent gets stressed over the curriculum, then remember what you're showing the child. You're showing the child that in a new situation, your response is stress, and you don't want them to learn that. You want them to learn to cope with new situations. So as a parent, we have that responsibility to show them how to cope with it and how to make it a positive experience.
Yes, thank you. The next question is, how much in terms of time-wise should a P6 be doing? And do you have any views yourself about the GL and AQE still going ahead this year?
Well, I think that's really a question for their teachers. How much? I'm not a teacher, so and not a primary school teacher, so I wouldn't want to sort of put down the exact number of hours that a child should do schoolwork, because, as I say, I think there must be a good balance between schoolwork and the other kinds of learnings that that the children can do in this time, and the same around the exams. I mean, you'd really need to ask somebody who is an expert in school exams. I'm not really. It's not really my area to have an opinion on what exams should go forward or not, because that's really quite outside the lockdown whether they go forward or not. I know. At the university level, I know that some universities have quite early on. One of my children's universities said that they would lock the grade in, so he could not get any worse. He could get better, but he couldn't get any worse, and that took a lot of stress out of the situation for him, because he was sitting on a nice grade, and he knew even through the changes and the different learning styles, his grade couldn't get any worse. And the other child at university was not given that message, and there was much more anxiety around that. So I think the schools can actually help with giving the kids as much information as possible, and being lenient, a bit more lenient in this situation, because it is a different situation. Kids have to adjust.
Of course. There's a couple of questions that have come in, which are both sort of related to motivating children / teenagers. The first of these is, I'm the parent of a teenager. It is extremely difficult to get him to engage with learning, as now there is no formal assessment. It is really hard to motivate him, and I feel he is doing the minimum, but I'm afraid he will suffer next year when entering his second year of A-levels. Are there any tips that you would give on making sure that children are still motivated in lieu of there being formal assessments?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite difficult to know how, really children shouldn't just be motivated by the exams in the first place. You'd hope that there are other motivators for the children. But one thing, it's called the pre-mark principle. It's actually where they are allowed to do certain things that they really want to do after they've done the things that they're not so keen in. Right, so it's a bit like eat your greens first and then you get your dessert kind of principle, where there are high probability behaviors that the children really enjoy doing, and I mean, for example, playing on the iPad or whatever, and you can say to them, like, yes, you can do that, but something else has to happen first, like the lower probability behavior, the behaviors that they're not so keen in. So if you study for 50 minutes, you can have 10 minutes on your iPad. That type of arrangement, so that you're actually reinforcing the activities that they need to do for schoolwork with an activity that they actually really love doing. So they're not getting limitless time on computers or iPads, but during the day it's actually slightly more regulated and linked maybe as a reward for doing some schoolwork, that type of thing. But
of course.
Whenever you're talking about motivating a young person, you have to remember that each young person is motivated by different things. So you need to really assess it with them. What are the motivators for them? Parents often have a really good idea, but you can also just ask them, the youngsters, and make sure that the motivators change over the period, because it's not the same motivator every day. it might have to be slightly changed so it doesn't become boring.
Sure. Earlier in the session, we spoke about the fact that the situation has given rise to sort of opportunities for parents to engage their children in sort of life skills, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
One question that has come in here just a moment ago that relates to that is, this time has given me the opportunity to know my children better.
Mm-hmm.
I have one child of 9 who is really struggling. My gut tells me that he possibly has some sort of attention deficit. How do I go about managing this during lockdown? There are 3 other kids at home, another 9-year-old, 11-year-old, and 14-year-old. What advice would you give there, Karola?
Yeah, I mean, frequent breaks, I think, during the work, given frequent breaks, and I think a lot of the kids, they don't get enough physical exercise these days. Very often they're on the computers, on the iPads, and especially during lockdown. If you have a garden, if you have the opportunity to give them some physical exercise, or even get some sort of like instrument at home, like a pull bar or something, like where they can actually or a trampoline or something like that, where they can actually get some of that energy burned off, especially when they're a little bit hyper. But also, I mean, all kids, they have more energy than adults, and they need to burn that off. So I think the 3 big ones, if you can get them right, is exercise, sleep, and nutrition. And if you can get them right, a lot of behavior problems come sort of second to that. If they're not too tired, if they're well enough healthily fed, and they've had some exercise, and then you start dealing with anything that's left over in terms of hyperactivity and behavior problems. But an awful lot of behavior problems can be dealt with on that very, very basic level, and we have access to those things. So make sure they don't eat too many sweets, all that sort of like the kind of high content of ease and things like that. They make people hyper. This is not a time when you need to have your child extra hyper in the house. If you have the opportunity to do that.
Certainly not.
Say it again.
Certainly not. It's a no from my household. It's difficult to keep Colleen away from the sweet cupboard from time to time.
Yeah.
A question that's just come in that relates to the very first question we asked, and the majority of these questions so far have been in relation to children who are in formal education.
Yeah.
But this question is, what are the impacts of isolation from their peers on preschool children's social development, and what alternatives can be provided to physical interactive play?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I've been thinking about that quite a bit, because it's one thing, again, it is as a parent not to beat yourself up too much about that, because they have the interaction with yourself. I mean, in some countries the kids don't start school until they're about 5 or 6, and so they would be at home until that time, with their siblings or whatever. The other thing is, kids are very knowledgeable about iPads and so forth. So why not set up a play date with their peers, and both parents put out the Lego or whatever they're playing with, and put the iPads on, lean it against the chair or the wall or something, and let them play together for an hour. I mean, it's the internet. It doesn't cost you anything extra. Just make a play date with their mates. They'll relate to that, to their friends on the internet. When they have the full screen of their mate playing a Lego, give them. They can build something. You build this, I build that, or we both build the same, or let's all try to build a house only using green blocks, or like whatever, just little tasks like that, so that they actually have play dates on the internet. Now we're doing that with work. We're having these kinds of sessions online. We're Skyping with, or whatever package we use, with grandparents and so forth and so forth. But actually having it running while you're playing together, I think kids would adjust to that very quickly, and they can pick up on social skills. You could have 2 or 3 kids on board with that as well. So that might be something worth thinking about.
Yeah, you sort of mentioned the technology, and it would have certainly been a different situation in 5 and certainly 10 years ago, before the advent of Zoom and Teams, etc. There's been a few questions around sort of the balance of work and play. And here's a question that relates to the holidays. How important is it to make sure children still get holidays? Will it do them any harm to keep them from their schoolwork routine in order to enable the grown-ups to keep working when they are supposed to be on school holidays?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure exactly about that. That's a question for like July and August, if you're still on lockdown, when the children are on holidays. Do you think I understood that right?
Yeah, I think I think you're probably right. But I suppose it opens the sort of other question up in relation to should parents be overly concerned about having a very strict routine in place, or a timetable? Yeah,
I mean, routines are usually quite helpful for kids, that you sort of say, okay, well, maybe we don't start at 8:30 or 9 o'clock, maybe we'll start at a slightly later time, but then we'll have 2 hours where actually everybody works, depending again on the age of the child. But you could, so having a schedule during the day is usually quite helpful, because then you don't have the argument, when do you start and when do you stop. But if you sort of say, well, between 10 and 12, that's when we all work. The parent works, the children have their tasks and they work, everybody works, and then we'll have lunch, and then maybe whatever, it doesn't have to be like 5, 6, 7 hours a day. I don't think so, because in the school day, there's an awful lot of social interaction, all the kinds of running about and things happening. It's not pure learning for so many hours. So it is about scheduling it. And as I say, not stressing out over it, because the stress that you create by doing that, the fighting, when if they refuse to do it, that's actually causing more damage than not to do the curriculum, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's a couple of questions that have come in related to sort of particular subjects, if you like, and I thought it'd only be a matter of time before a question that mentioned maths came in. I'm helping to teach a 9-year-old and 6-year-old. Sometimes it's difficult to explain certain concepts, such as a particular maths problem. Have you any advice around finding different strategies to convey subjects?
Yeah, one very nice strategy is, for instance, cooking together. I've mentioned that earlier, but it's a really nice one. Or baking together. So if it's about fractions or something like that, it's very easy to sort of say, well, here is the recipe, but we are going to just cook a quarter of the recipe, because otherwise it's too much, or we're cooking double the recipe, and then let the kids do all the math to work out how much they need of all the things. So make it practical and make it integrate it into your daily life. It's really integrating like it used to be in the old days, integrating every lesson into your daily life, and get the kids to participate in that. Don't do it all for them, but then you're not allowing them to do the learning. Does that make sense?
Yes. And another question that I have, perhaps in relation to that, is would you say that there is a rule of thumb about sort of how long you should be trying to work with your child in any one go? Sort of how long should you sit with them working before taking a break? Does that depend does that vary from child to child, would you say?
Yeah, I think it varies. I mean, obviously it varies. It very much varies according to the age and the stage of the child, where they're at in their learning. I mean, if we're talking about the kids doing their A levels, I mean, they can do a couple of hours probably pretty much self-directed. Maybe take a break after. I mean, I think that the computer access, there's a sort of a rule of thumb. You should really take a 10-minute break after every 50 minutes, so that you have an hour, but the last 10 minutes are actually away from the computer, just going for a wee walk or jumping about something on the trampoline or whatever. It's roughly that, but with the older children, they can continue to do that again and again. The school lessons are usually about 45 minutes, But with the very young ones, the school lesson can be 15 minutes or half an hour. You know, it really depends on the concentration span of your child. And, you know, in a sense, with the younger ones, I would go for little but often. So that you sort of say 15 minutes and then you do something else and then you do another 15 minutes. But you get into a rhythm. Sometimes for kids, it works quite well if you draw it out on a schedule. So you draw like little pictures or something, and you have a schedule where they can actually follow it themselves. So you say, okay, here's your clock. For 15 minutes we're doing schoolwork. Then we have 15 minutes running around in the garden. Then we have 15 minutes cooking, or you know, whatever. So that they actually, it becomes predictable for them. So then you don't have
Yes.
battle every day. You make it a predictable thing. This is what we do Monday to Friday. This is our schedule from, and the weekend we do something. So you stay in a sort of a routine with them.
Yeah, probably just as important for the adults themselves.
Totally, yeah.
Having that sort of routine. I know in working from home over the last couple of months, it's become increasingly important to make sure that not only Killian has that sort of routine as if he was still at daycare, but for the parents themselves. Further question here on reading, and I suspect it will be a similar response to the one you just gave, but it asks, do you have any suggestions on how to get children who do not enjoy reading to read?
Mm-hmm. The answer is a little bit similar, because it is about making reading functional. That's a kind of language we would use, making it useful. Okay, making reading useful. So like, they don't like to read just for the sake of reading. But later on, the older ones, they'd love maybe picking up a book or something. But the very young ones, I mean, if they can actually, if reading gets them places. So you could even, you know, put words up in the house, put stickers up in the house, and they read the word, and then they get what the word says. You know, if they wanted a biscuit, then they have to read the word, and you could change them around so that one day it's biscuits, another one and it's cookie or something, so that they actually have to read. Or if you're doing an activity, if you're building something, maybe there's an instruction in the way it needs to be built up. Then let the kids read the instruction and work it out. We tend to sometimes help the kids too much, prompt them too much, and do it for them. And that's actually a learning opportunity for the child. I mean, everything depends on where the child's at, the age and stage of learning. But if you adjust it to the need, to the ability of the child, you can actually find an awful lot of learning in day-to-day activities that need to be done anyway. So if, you know, even reading a recipe, we're back to cooking again, but you know, or cleaning the house, whatever they're helping.
Mm-hmm. I think we have time for one final question, and this final question almost could have been written by me. My kids' sleep routine has shifted by about 2 to 3 hours. So they're going to bed around 10 or 11, but sleeping in late. Does this affect learning, or do they just need a good night's sleep to learn effectively?
Yeah, I think I mean, they need a good night's sleep to learn effectively. And I was actually going to suggest sometimes maybe letting them stay up a little longer in the evening, and that gets them sleeping longer, which means it gives you a couple of hours time to get on with your own work, depending obviously what that is. But you know, if you have to do some work on the computer and it's nice and quiet in the house, and you can do that from 7 to 9 before the kids waking up, well, that's great. You know, that gives you that work time, and that also relaxes you then. When the kids waking up, you say, well, I've already done 2 hours work. Now it's time for the kids to get them ready, get them breakfasted and whatever else, dressed and whatever, and then setting them down for their learning schoolwork routine, and that gives you another slot. But so that you as a parent try and arrange it so that it becomes as little stressful as possible. That gets us back to the mental health question. This time can be a great learning opportunity for kids. It's forced upon us. You know, none of us went into this voluntarily, but let's make the best of it, out of that situation. Let's take the learning opportunities. Let's relax around any of the stresses that we might feel because that's really what does the kids a lot of harm, is when the parents are getting anxious, when the parents are getting stressed out. That has a much worse effect on the children than what we think might have a bad effect on them. It's the parental model that really ultimately has the biggest effect on the children. And one of the motivators that I find always intriguing, parents don't seem to sometimes see it, time with a parent. Just time with a parent can be a great motivator for kids, especially the younger ones. Play a game with them in the evenings, you know, a game of whatever, card games. And card games are big in our house. But they love, I mean, we were saying the other night, let's play a card game. And usually they're all in their rooms and doing their thing with their social media and so forth. We said, okay, tonight we're playing a card game. They were down like a shot. Everybody was around the living room table. You know, the time with the parent is really one of the big neglected motivators for kids. Say, okay, let's do this, and then have a game together, or we'll go for a walk together, or we take the dog out, or what, you know, we do something together.
Yes, and I think you hit the nail on the head. I think when things have sort of come back to some sort of sense of normality, I think for all families there'll be an opportunity to look back on the sort of the points of it that were more positive, perhaps, and the opportunities that it did give for the family all to sort of come together as one, perhaps more often than they might normally do.
Yeah,
Professor. Oh, sorry. After you.
It's okay. I just hope so, and I hope everybody is making the best of it, because that's all we can do in the long run.
Well, Professor Dillenburger, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm sure that's been of great help, and I'm sure reassurance to a lot of parents. Thank you also to people that sent their questions in. The session has been recorded, and it will be available across social media and on the alumni website over the coming days. We'll also be announcing further episodes in the series over the coming days and weeks. So please keep an eye out for them. But until next time, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you, Professor Dillenburger.
You're very welcome. Bye-bye.